when an alien fails to erase her, a love, identity, and survival story. The first time Tom opened Daisy's eyes, the light hurt. Not because it was bright, but because it was full of someone else's life. It slid under her lashes and found the places memory hid, prying, illuminating, reminding. He felt it in the curl of her fingers against the edge of the mattress, in the ache of a throat that had learned to swallow sobs without sound. Even the breath he drew belonged to her before it belonged to him. He could taste salt that wasn't his, and fear that was. He waited for the familiar diminishing, the host's mind receding, the last clinging threads dissolving in a warm, anesthetic hush. It had always happened like that before, clean, efficient, a mercy. This time mercy did not come. Something in the dark pressed back. No, the word wasn't spoken, but it pushed against the inside of his skull as surely as a hand against his chest. It had heat, shape, will. He went still, and the body he inhabited went still with him. He felt the raw places where he did not fit, like a new shoe blistering skin. He reached for calm, the practiced detachment taught to him in slow, careful lessons, and met fire instead. "I'm still here. You don't get to make me into smoke." He could have said the phrases, the ones his kind used when minds flared like this. "It's all right. Let go. We're gentle. We heal." He found he couldn't make his mouth form them, not because he doubted the words, but because she might laugh, and he did not know if he could bear her laughter. The room was small and careful. A plant on the sill, leaves glossy with attention, a sweater thrown over the back of a chair, the shape of shoulders still living in it. A framed photo laid face down beside the bed, as if someone had needed to stop those eyes from looking. Tom did not turn it over. He already knew whose faces were in it. He knew because the ache inside him carried names. Daisy. The mind said the name, as if it had been carved into the bone of the word mine, and beyond that, braided through it like thread. Jamie, Jared. The names were more than syllables. They were doors. And when they blew open, wind surged through him, bright and ungovernable, a little boy's laugh, which a person either built a life around or didn't deserve to hear, the weight of a hand gripping yours when the room was dark. And the city outside was full of footsteps, a boy grown into a man whose mouth knew how to find joy on another mouth, and who didn't know how to pretend not to feel. Tom drew a breath and found it wasn't breath anymore. It was a memory. It was a kiss she refused to surrender, pressed against her own mouth from the other side of the glass. "Stop," he said, and the sound of Daisy's voice in his throat startled him, as if her body were reminding him who would be heard here. He spread his hands on the coverlet. He could feel the roughness where fingernails had snagged thread. He could feel the tremor she tried to hide. He could feel her everywhere. "I don't want to hurt you. You already did." Something inside him flinched. He tried to think of the elders, of their voices like cool water poured over embers. "We find dying places and bring them quiet. We find lives torn by fear and teach them peace. We do not steal, we share." He could have repeated those truths until his throat went hoarse. They did not alter the fact that this was her body, and he was. Inside it, and she had said no. He stood. The body rose with him, light and steady, but the steadiness was borrowed. He crossed to the window, pushed the curtain aside. Morning hung over the city like pale silk. People walked in even lines, faces unguarded, voices soft. No anger in the air, no shouting neighbors, no engines shrieking down avenues. The invasion had smoothed everything, edges rounded, dangers declawed, hunger and hurt door-locked, and sent to bed without supper. No one bled in the gutters anymore. He had seen the before. He could not deny that the after was kinder. Still, as he watched a woman kneel to tie a child's shoe with patient fingers, Daisy's heart surged in him, and the window fogged with the warmth of it. Her longing had a taste like metal. He touched the fog with the tips of her fingers and felt an absurd urge to write something there. A name, a promise. He let his hand fall. "You can see it, can't you?" Daisy's voice braided through him. Rage, softened by a plea she didn't want to make. "You can see Jamie there, tripping over his own feet. You can see me, and you can't have us." He turned from the window, and the action felt like turning from himself. "What would you have me do?" "Get out. I don't know if I can." Silence, taut as a wire. Then you don't touch what isn't yours. You don't pretend I'm quiet when I'm screaming. You don't—" She broke off, and for a moment memories washed to the edges, breathless. "You don't wear my face to find him." Tom didn't. Ask which him? The answer had been printed on his tongue since he opened her eyes. He reached for the sweater, the one still shaped like shoulders, and pulled it on. It was too big for her. For him. The sleeves swallowed her wrists, and her hands looked like small, brave things poking through. He made a fist and felt the ghost of another's fingers twine with his. He loosened the fist as if he could loosen memory too. "I won't pretend you're not here," he said. "I can't, but I have to walk. We have to eat. We have to make the bed at least, or the woman who comes to check will see, and she'll call someone I don't want her to call." "You're afraid." The thought brushed across him, testing. He didn't lie. "Yes." "Good. Be afraid like I am." So they started the day together, and calling it together was both accurate and a betrayal. He made the bed with careful hands. She shoved pictures into the back of his mind like contraband. He brushed her teeth too gently, because hers had bled once, and he didn't know why, and it made his stomach twist. He tied her hair back to keep it out of their eyes, and his fingers remembered how she'd learned to do it in the dark, one elastic around her wrist, one mouth steady and set. When he opened the door, light stroked her skin, and her skin shivered with the reflex to step back. He didn't. She didn't either, because she wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Walking through the market was like walking through a dream that wanted to be real. Fruit stacked in obedient pyramids, bread in rows, unburned, unpriced, people smiling with their mouths and their eyes at the same time. Tom felt the way the peace rested on the city like a blessing. He also felt the way it stretched thin when someone looked too closely, when someone's gaze caught on the wrong rhythm in a step, on a pause between a word and the next. He kept his pauses short. He made his smiles reach his eyes. He reached for a bag of oranges. Daisy flared. "No. Jamie hates picking the seeds out." He took his hand back and picked apples instead. Her surprise flickered. She hadn't expected him to listen. He didn't know how to explain that listening cost him nothing and saved him something he couldn't name. He lined up with the others, each waiting with patience that belonged to his kind. The woman at the register looked at him and then at the apples and said, "You haven't been here before," which was true for both of them. He said, "Not recently," which was true enough. He paid, with credits assigned to Daisy's new life, with her name burned into them in clean white letters, and watched his own reflection wobble in the counterglass. Her eyes looked back out at him, green and clear and furious. He carried the apples home. He washed them in the sink like ritual, and sliced one and let the sweet break open on her tongue. For a moment, her grief quieted to let the taste come through. She wasn't thanking him, he understood. She just couldn't hold everything at once. They ate, they cleaned, they sat at the small table that had one scratch running the length of it where someone had dragged a box when they were too tired to lift. He laid Daisy's palms flat against the wood to feel the scar, to acknowledge it. She let him. The sun moved across the floor, and he watched the square of it crawl up her leg and across the table and over the apples. There was a tenderness to the ordinary that he had not known in other lives. He suspected that was because in this one, he was being watched by someone who had loved the ordinary fiercely enough to fight a war for it. "What did they tell you I would be?" she asked finally. "A ghost?" "An echo," he said. It was the word he'd been given, barrel smooth and harmless. He tasted it and found it sour. A voice without a person in it. Do I sound like that? No, good. He didn't tell her that he had begun to prefer the days when she was loud. The quiet made him aware of himself in ways he did not like. In the quiet, he could hear guilt scraping at the floor of him with patient fingernails. He could hear everything. He had believed bending under the weight of what he knew now, the way a shelf bends under too many books and keeps holding until the screws shear. By afternoon, there were footsteps in the hallway that belonged to people who checked and noticed. He steadied his breath. Before he opened the door, Daisy slid a fragment of memory under it ahead of him, the exact face of the woman who would knock, the tilt of her head, the polite words offered like a tea tray. Tom opened to that face and matched his own with practiced ease. "How are you settling?" the woman asked. She had a badge that said custodian in letters carefully chosen to mean one thing and suggest another. "Fine," Tom said, because fine was the correct answer. Daisy mouthed liar in a way that made his lips feel it. "We like it when it's peaceful," the woman said. "We like it when people sleep through the night." He nodded. He did not say, "I hardly slept." The mind I keep trying to call a mind decides when we breathe and doesn't ask me first. He did not say, "I learned the names of two people I never met, and now my chest aches like an old bruise." When the custodian left, Daisy exhaled the breath she had been holding for both of them. "Don't tell them about Jamie," she said. "I won't." "Don't. Tell them about Jared." "I won't. Don't tell them about me. I can't help that." "Try." He did. It made him clumsy. It made him too careful with his hands. It made him say "we," and then bark his tongue against his teeth and spit out an "I," and feel both of them flinch. By evening, the city had that tired, golden look that makes people want to stand in doorways and talk themselves into forgetting. Tom stood at the window again because the ritual of it soothed him. The glass held him at once near and far, giving him back a face that belonged to two people. Down on the sidewalk, a boy with a soccer ball almost tripped a woman, and both laughed. And he saw Daisy's memory slot itself into place against the moment like two fingers interlacing. "We aren't going to make it like this," she said. The truth of it hummed in his bones. "You keep pretending you're alone inside your head, and I keep pretending I won't go mad if I have to watch you move my arms. We're going to have to decide what we're doing." "What we're doing," he murmured, testing the shape of it, "is not dying. That's not the same as living." He turned his back on the window and faced the room, and her anger washed through him clean and bright. "Tell me what living looks like then, finding them." The answer came so fast, he knew she had been carrying it at the back of her teeth all day. "Jamie first, because he will be afraid, and he still forgets to tie his shoes when he runs. Jared, next because he will be reckless and someone has to tell him when to stop. And after, he asked, because he needed to know if her road had an end, or if they would walk until their feet bled and call it progress. After, we keep them safe. She sounded almost amazed that he would ask. "What else is there? You think they're alive?" "I have to." She let him feel the place in her where faith and stubbornness held hands, because if they didn't, she would fall. He didn't believe and he didn't disbelieve. He held her belief up to the light like a coin and watched it flash, and it was enough to tell him which direction to take a step. He chose that direction. He didn't tell her it was because he couldn't stand how she sounded when she said please without saying the word. They walked out into the corridor together and were careful not to walk like a person talking to themselves. They moved like obedience. They moved like peace. They moved like people who had never hidden anything in closets or under planks on the balcony floor. They turned their faces toward the elevator camera without flinching. Their pulse did not change when a custodian in grey passed them with a nod. If anyone looked at them, they saw a girl with a neat ponytail and a sweater too big, going nowhere in particular. They went to the public terminals because that was how you pretended not to be looking. Tom kept his fingers from trembling on the keys by borrowing Daisy's steadiness, the skill you learn when you teach your hands not to shake, so your little brother doesn't learn from you. He searched by names, and when that brought up only sanitized records, he searched by absence, by the shape of missing. The system did not like it. It dimmed in a warning way. He adjusted his search into something that could pass for curiosity. There were places the invasion hadn't softened all the way, corners where the fabric snagged, sub-basements where the old machines still burned whatever they wanted, and then belched it into the air because no one had convinced them to be good yet. There were places people like Jared would go. There were places Jamie would be led by people who loved him but couldn't guarantee the next day's bread. Daisy knew the maps even if she pretended she didn't. Tom followed the feeling of her gaze over the city like following the beam of a flashlight. The first stop was a market on the edge of the districts, where the new light thinned and the old light came through like cracks. The man there sold batteries with the labels peeled off and shoes that didn't come in pairs, but could be convinced. He had eyes that watched for whose hands reached together in a way that said family even when the mouths didn't. Tom asked for nothing and bought a coil of wire. The man told him, "You walked like someone used to climbing stairs 2 at a time." Tom said, "I'm trying to stop," and the man gave him a look that said he had seen that kind of trying before and wished it luck. The second stop was a laundromat that didn't wash anything. The machines were broken but warm, and people sat on them and told each other stories with the door open so anyone could hear. A woman with a braid down her back said, "There was a boy last week, thin, eyes like he couldn't stop seeing, called himself Jamie one minute and Jim the next. Said he had a sister who would find him before the world did." Daisy's breath shot all the way to Tom's fingertips. He made his voice stay level. "Which way did he go?" The woman pointed with her chin. "Where all the runaways go when they remember it's better to run together. They walked. It became night without their noticing, because they were moving inside the pulse of purpose. Tom had believed purpose belonged to his kind, shaped in counsels and delivered like liturgy. He had not understood that purpose could be this quiet thing you folded into your pocket, a direction so simple it made the rest of the world step back and let it through. On the third morning, they saw him. He was smaller than the boy in Daisy's, fierce, polished memory, and narrower with hunger. He was trying to look bigger than his bones could manage. He stood with his back to a wall and his hands shoved into a coat that had belonged to someone kinder, and when he saw them, he tried not to see them. Daisy made a sound inside Tom that tore him nearly in two. Tom said the name as if he were laying it on an altar. Jamie. The boy looked at the mouth that said it, and then at the eyes above the mouth, and then at the hands, and then at the way those hands shook with not enough sleep. He did not move, he did not run. His face tried to be hard and found it could only be older. "Who are you?" he asked, not in the frightened way, but in the way of someone who expects to be lied to and wants to be sure he can tell. Tom's throat closed. He had prepared a dozen answers, soft words that would ask to be trusted. None of them would make the truth smaller. He said, "I'm carrying someone you love." The boy's chin jutted the way a chin does when a person decides to stand in the doorway while the storm happens. He folded his arms. He did not say the name that would make him weaker. "I'm still here," Daisy said, and Tom let her shape the words. Let her weight them with her voice. Let her shift in the bones just enough to let a person who knew her know her. "Jamie, I'm still here." The boy flinched as if a hand had touched the back of his neck. He took one stumbling step forward. His mouth twitched into a smile, then a sob, then a smile again, then something that was neither. He didn't reach out. He waited like someone at a cliff edge who has learned the ground can fall away. "Prove it," he said, and Tom loved him for it, for protecting the small thing inside himself that still trusted. Daisy did not list facts. She did not produce dates and times. She told him the thing only she would know. When you were 6, you crawled into my bed because the rain sounded like footsteps, and you told me to breathe so you could count. I let you fall asleep first, and I didn't move all night because you were heavy and because I liked it. Jamie's face broke open so cleanly that Tom felt wind in his chest. The boy covered his eyes with his hands. Then he did reach out, but not to embrace. He took Daisy's wrist like it was both a lifeline and a question, and pressed his thumb to the pulse, counting the way he must have done to fall asleep. He nodded at what he felt. He nodded like someone tallying a miracle and deciding to keep it. You shouldn't have come, he said. It was probably what he meant to say all along, and it was a way of saying, I'm glad you did. They're watching this place. Tom glanced up without moving his head. Habit. The rooftops were too tidy, the street too clean. Order had a way of shining where it wasn't needed. We won't stay, he said. Jamie's eyes came to him, and Tom held that gaze steady. He didn't hide. He didn't ask to be forgiven. The boy studied him with the courtesy of someone assessing a danger he might have to sleep in the same room with. Are you hurting her? No. Tom swallowed. I'm trying not to. That's not the same thing. I know. The boy nodded, as if the admission were the first useful thing he'd heard. Jared's going to want to hit you, he said, conversational, as if discussing the weather. I expect he will. I'll let him once, Jamie said. Not twice. He lifted his chin as if daring the world to try to change his mind. Tom looked at him with a sorrow that sat in his bones like an old man. Thank you. They did not hug in the street. They were not foolish. Jamie slipped back into the path between buildings, and they slipped after, bodies aligned with the lines of shadow. He took them to a place where doors led to more doors, and then to a staircase that had learned to listen to the feet that stepped on it. He knocked on a panel not much bigger than his hand. A code someone had taught him that sounded like rain. If you weren't paying attention. The door opened a crack, then all the way. Jared was not in it. He was deeper in, near a map and a circle of faces that looked at new people like they might be broken machines or bombs. He didn't stand when he saw them. He didn't breathe for a second, as if breath would be a concession. Then he said her name, Daisy's name, without letting his voice break. Tom went down the stairs, and each step felt like a verdict. He did not put his hands up. He did not clench them. He kept them open and empty, and he kept Daisy near the skin. And he did not fight it when her heart sprinted and stole his knees. He stopped 2 paces away, because 2 paces felt like the distance where longing could still be dignified. Jared, Daisy said, and it was the way a person says the place they grew up, all its streets wrapped inside the syllables. Jared's jaw went tight, because that sound wanted him to close his eyes, and he did not trust the dark. He stepped forward and put his hands on her shoulders like he had placed them there 100 times before. Tom held very still and wished for the first time that he could be made of glass. Mel, he said hoarsely, what did you do? It was a cruel question. It was also a fair one. She took it like a punch and stayed standing. I didn't let go. Jared looked at Tom, not at his face, at him, at the wrongness of what lived behind it. The fury in his gaze was beautiful and terrible, the way some storms are poems even as they tear roofs off. Get out of her. I can't, Tom said, and did not raise his voice to meet the demand. If I could, I would. Liar. Tom accepted the word. He would have accepted worse. He didn't explain the impossible way he had come to love the person who hated him. He didn't say he had stopped believing leaving was entirely up to him. Daisy, in her reckless tenderness, did something he would never have allowed if he'd had breath enough to stop her. She leaned forward into Jared's hands and pressed her forehead lightly to his chest, just under his collarbone, exactly where memory said home was. Jared's fingers tightened on her shoulders, and the sound he made then was not anger. It was the sound a person makes when the thing they lost lays down at their feet and licks their hand. The room let them have that heartbeat. Then the people in it resumed being what they were, practical. The woman at the map had eyes that weighed hope like rations. She cleared her throat. "If they followed you, you brought a basket of snakes into our pantry." Jamie turned his head sharply. "They didn't." He spoke with the absolute conviction of someone who had been convinced of too many fragile things, and now guarded belief like a dog. They were careful. Jared made a small motion with his hand, soothing Jamie without looking at him. He kept his gaze on Tom. "If you hurt her, I will cut you out of that body with my hands, and I don't care if I die doing it." Tom believed him. He inclined his head. "If I hurt her, I'll help you." Jared's nostrils flared as if the answer insulted him with its calm. "We feed you, and you leave. You walk until your feet fall off." Jared. Daisy's voice was gentle in a way that broke the skin. "He got me here because you asked him to," Jared snapped. "And if there was a person in the room capable of hurting the word you, it was him. You think that makes him good?" "No," she said, and her honesty was a small act of courage. "It makes him mine to manage." That turned Jared's fury into something he could use. He exhaled once, hard, and stepped back. He looked at the woman at the map, and then at the others. "We don't move tonight," he said. "We sit. We listen at the door. We wake in shifts." He didn't say we breathe because that part didn't need saying. He took his hand back from her shoulder, but not far. The way a person puts a candle on the table, but keeps their palm hovering near to feel the heat. That night, the world contracted to the size of a room with a leak in one corner that had been dealt with by putting a pot under it. Tom lay on a mat on the floor because he wasn't trusted with a bed, and he did not argue because he wasn't. He listened to the soft breathings of people who had learned to sleep when told and wake without complaint. He listened to the whisper of a finger on paper, counting marks that meant food. He listened to the quiet clicks of the woman with the map as she moved pins a fraction of an inch, because that was the only control she had left. He listened to Jared's breath change when Daisy shifted, even though Jared was pretending not to watch her breath. He watched Jamie curl up like a comma beside a wall and hold himself as if he had forgotten he was allowed to hold other people now. Sometime after the middle of the night, Jared's shadow crossed the room and knelt beside him. He didn't wake Tom. He woke Daisy, and Tom came with her because they were the same waking in different clothes. "Do you feel safe with him inside you?" Jared asked, each word wrapped in cloth to keep it from breaking. Daisy answered first. "I feel watched." He huffed an unhappy breath. "That isn't an answer. It's the only true one." Jared stared at the floor at the place where the mat met the concrete. "If you asked me to try," he said quietly, "I would. I don't want to, but I would." Tom could not pretend he did not know what Jared meant. Try to see him as not, only a monster. Try to accept that her voice existed alongside his without assuming it meant he had stolen it from her. Try to speak to him without choking on the words. Tom felt gratitude unfurl in him like something delicate and new. He held very still so nothing would startle it. "Don't be kind because you're scared," Daisy murmured. "Be kind because you are." Jared made a frustrated noise, part laugh. "You always want too much." "I know." He rose like a man lifting a weight and returned to his post near the door, and Tom listened to his breathing even after it slid back into rhythm, because that too was something like a promise. Morning brought the world back in. It brought the smell of the city unwashed, and the sound of a truck that shouldn't exist anymore, rumbling somewhere it wasn't permitted to go. It brought a knocking that wasn't code and wasn't polite. It brought Jared's hand on Daisy's, arm hard enough to bruise, and then not quite. "Don't talk," he said, which was the most he could do to protect someone who shared a mouth with the person he wanted to kill. The door opened onto a man in grey with a neutral face. He had a voice, like people who have learned their job, requires both gentleness and force. "We're checking residencies." "This isn't a residence," the woman at the map said, the words oiled to slide past questions. "We check all spaces." Jared stepped into the man's view without blocking it. He said nothing. He did not need to. His body said enough. The man in grey was not a fool. His eyes moved over the room and rested on some people longer than others. When they reached Daisy's face, they stayed there. He tilted his head like a bird listening under snow. "You're new," he said. Tom kept still. He did not retreat. He could not. He did not reach for Daisy to ask for help because he already had it, held like a rope tied around his waist. "Yes." "What district?" Tom named the one printed on her papers. The man's gaze slid from her to Jared and then to Jamie and then back as if trying to trace a line between them and decide if it existed. He gave the small nod of someone who has located a hair out of place but doesn't have scissors. "We can help you find your assigned dwelling." "She's with me," Jared said, too quickly for compliance. Tom felt Daisy's joy at his foolishness so sharply it might have lit the room. The man looked at Jared for a slow beat. Jared did not blink. The man smiled, a thin, professional thing. "Of course she is," he said. He stepped back to let them be with the illusion he was granting. "We'll return at dusk." When the door shut, the room breathed out through teeth. The woman with the map said, "We need to move," and no one argued with her. She started plucking pins from the board with brisk fingers, and each one sounded like a clock tick that had been waiting. They moved. They stripped the room down to a handful of things that could plausibly belong to nobody. They folded sleep, and taped over light switches, and erased the imprint of feet in dust. They did not speak in whispers, because whispers make people listen. They spoke in normal tones and said things like, "Pass me that," and "Watch your step," and "Where's the tape?" And the normalcy did more for invisibility than fear could. They split in twos and threes because groups make shapes that anyone can count. The woman with the braid went one way with two boys who could run faster than they could think. The woman with the map went another with a man who had learned to pray without moving his lips. Jared took Jamie by the scruff of his jacket like a cat and then softened and let him walk. Tom took Daisy because that was already true. They passed, through backrooms and behind locked fences and down corridors that smelled like a time before things were scrubbed. At an alley's end, a door looked like it wouldn't open. It opened. On the other side, the light was wrong for the hour, too dim, and the air had a taste like someone else's medicine. Jared led confidently, the way he had learned the halls of the city, the way a person learns their own mouth. "Where are we going?" Tom asked, because Daisy was worried, and because he owed her the dignity of information. "A place they don't like to watch," Jared said without looking back. "It bores them." "What is it?" "A library." It was, or had been. The shelves still stood like soldiers who had forgotten how to fight. The books had been sorted into neat stacks a long time ago and then left because the world had decided. Stories were dangerous and then decided they weren't interesting. Dust softened everything, including the edges of fear. Jared shut the door behind them and leaned his forehead against it for a second. Then he turned around and looked at Tom. Not unkindly, which was worse because Tom didn't know what to do with it. "I know why you came," Jared said. "I know you'll say it was her. I know you'll be right." He scrubbed a hand over his face. "I also know there's a person in there who isn't her, and I can't make myself pretend you don't exist." Tom nodded once. "You don't have to pretend," Jared grimaced. That wasn't reassurance. It wasn't meant to be. Tom closed his eyes and opened them again, because he wanted honesty, like he wanted air. "I don't know what I am in there. I'm not hiding from that." Daisy broke in with a softness Tom had begun to recognize as the way she made room for other people's truths. "You're a person. That's what you are. I hate what you did. That's not the same thing." Tom let her words sit in him without touching them. If he touched them, he would shake. Jamie climbed a shelf-like stairs and sat with his feet dangling, looking lighter than he had since the first moment in the street. "This place smells like Mrs. Fenton," he announced to no one, and the way Daisy's heart lurched at the name made Tom memorize it. "Who's watching the watchers?" the woman with the map asked from the doorway she had appeared in, as if walls were ideas to her and not things. Jared said, "We are," and pointed discreetly to corners where small round eyes blinked red when you looked straight at them and dead when you didn't. "We cough when the lights blink," he told Jamie. "We cough if we hear shoes that sound like taxes." Jamie nodded gravely and coughed as if practicing. They spent that day in a kind of truce that belonged to people on ships. No one asked to get off because there was no off. They ate what could be eaten without making smell. They drank water that had been filtered through dignity. They waited. Waiting flattens time. It also makes room in it. In the long hours when no footsteps approached the door, Tom learned small things he had not known he would need. He learned that Jamie chewed the inside of his cheek when he was making decisions, and that if you said his name softly, he would stop, as if it reminded him he did not have to. He learned that the woman with the map had a laugh that sounded like the crack in a board giving way, and that she had once been a teacher, which is why she could move large groups with small words. He learned that Jared was better at mending small broken things than he was at making speeches. He learned that Daisy liked to sit with her knees pulled up and her arms wrapped around them, not because she was cold, but because it made the world smaller and kinder. And he learned to let her have the posture even if it made his legs fall asleep. He learned, too, that he could not hold the lie in his mouth any longer, not even for her sake. At twilight, when light made the windows blind, he said, "They will come." The room went still in the way rooms do when a truth is set down, among them like a full glass, and no one wants to spill it. Jared didn't ask how he knew, because he understood the difference between guessing and carrying dread like a message. You were born to deliver. The woman with the map made the smallest sound of frustration at being out of time. Jamie stared at the door like he could bite whoever walked through it. "Then we stop waiting," Jared said. "We go out." "That's worse," the woman murmured. "We're mice, they're owls." "Then we come at them under the grass," Jared said. He made a shape with his hands that meant splitting. He looked at Tom. "Can you pretend to be them?" Tom met his eyes. It was a harder question than it sounded. "I am them." Jared held his stare long enough to make the words sting. "Then act like it." They gave Tom an order he despised, and he took it. Walk out first alone, calm as someone with a pass in his pocket. Draw the attention. Speak to the men in grey in the dialect that says we when it means you. Let them think the people behind you were a misunderstanding, a crowd you wandered into, a place you stopped to tie your shoe. Let them put their hands on you and not on the door. Daisy rose inside him in a single startled throb. "No," he whispered, to her without moving his lips. "If they follow you, they'll tear everything. If they take me, I can keep them from looking too closely. I know how they look. I won't let you." "You already have," he said gently, and the aching truth of it made him steady. "You made me someone who has to try." Jared put a hand on his shoulder in a gesture that surprised both of them. It was a fighter's hand, nicked and scabbed and strong. It was also a man's hand who had loved the body under it in 100 gentler ways. He squeezed once. It did not feel like forgiveness. It felt like permission to do a dangerous thing and have it mean something. "Don't be brave," he said roughly. "Be smart. I'll try." Tom walked to the door. He put his hand on the knob and felt the cold of metal that had held too many hands. He felt Daisy behind it in him like a tide at his back. He opened the door and stepped into a light that had been waiting. The men in grey were not many. That was the mercy and the danger. Too few to make noise, enough to make damage. Their faces were tranquil with duty. They looked at Tom like you. Look at a sign that tells you what you already know. He smiled in the way his kind had taught him. He kept his palms visible. Evening, he said. Pleasant. You're early? We said dusk. The one in front had eyes like the edges of coins. That's what this is. Tom nodded, as if conceding the point in a conversation about weather. There's no one you need to trouble. This building is clean. How do you know that? I checked it, he said, letting pride creep into his voice the way it did in people who liked being assigned important tasks. I ahead of you checked it. The man's mouth twitched like a cat's tail. Do you have your identification? Tom produced the card with Daisy's new name and her borrowed past printed in it. The man took it between two fingers as if worried its data might smudge. He scanned it with a device that made a small, contented beep and did not ask the question it should have, because it had been taught there were questions it didn't need. The man handed the card back and said, You should go home. I will, Tom said, after I finish here. They might have let him. They might have nodded and turned away and left the library to its dust. That was the moment the world could have tilted towards safety. Instead, a voice came from the corner near the alley, a voice Tom recognized too late. Lauren. Her hair was the kind that always looked combed. Her gaze had the too careful patience of someone who sat in the front. Row on purpose. You don't usually check here, she said mildly. You don't usually check anywhere you're not sent. The man in grey shifted his stance by a fraction. It was encouragement and correction. We rotate. You announce rotations, Lauren said, so pleasantly that it took a moment to hear what the words were doing. She looked past the men in grey and straight at Tom. Why don't you tell them why you're really here? Tom could have ordered his face. He could have told the muscles what to do, and the skin to lie, and the eyes to hold steady. He found that all of him wanted to tell the truth. That was the trouble with learning to listen to someone like Daisy. You forgot how to hum. We're here, he said slowly, because we didn't want you to come. The man in grey lifted his chin a degree. We? Tom sighed. I have a passenger. The world quieted with the kind of quiet that precedes an avalanche. The men in grey took one step forward in the same second. Lauren did not move. Come with us, the man said. He didn't bother with gentleness this time. Take me, Tom said. That's the cleanest way. There was a cough in the library behind him, very soft, like someone clearing their throat over tea. It was the agreed sound. He didn't turn. His head. He couldn't. The men in grey closed in, professional hands unafraid of bodies. They didn't hurt him. He didn't make them. He let them bind his wrists. He let them search his pockets and find nothing. He let them think this was the entire story. Don't touch the doors, he said conversational when they began to move. They stick. The man in grey nearest him glanced down at the knob automatically. The merest hesitation. It was enough for what Jared needed. The library had many doors. The one Jared chose was not a door anyone else had noticed. It swung on silent hinges that had been oiled with care, and the people who could not be seen slid through it like ink under paper. When the men in grey glanced up again, Tom was walking between them, as if there had never been anyone behind him at all. Lauren watched him with eyes that had forgotten how to blink. She walked beside him, close enough that her sleeve brushed his. Under her breath, so low only a person in the same skin as himself could have heard, she said, I knew it wasn't an echo. He turned his head a fraction. What did you do with your echo, Lauren? She smiled without learning his answer. I buried it. But sometimes I dream I hear scratching. He wanted to tell her to listen. He wanted to tell her to put her ear. to the ground and find out if the thing she had buried was trying to be born. He didn't. He walked. They took him to a place that was all white and all light and had corners designed to make secrets look foolish. He had been here before, in training, as an observer, as a helper with clean hands. He had watched people like him take people like him out of bodies like these and put them into jars that hummed with sleeping, and then put those jars in rooms that sang silence at them until they forgot why they had sung anything else. The elders came like a tide. They had faces that people would tell the truth to. They sat. He stood. It was all very civilized. "What do you want us to do with you?" one asked. Her voice was very gentle. It was the kind of voice capable of telling someone they were going. "To be erased and making them feel grateful." "Ask me why I didn't finish," Tom said first, because he needed to put the question on the table like bread. The elder tilted her head. "Why didn't you finish?" "She didn't let me," he said, and felt Daisy lift her chin inside him at the accuracy. "And I listened." "There are procedures for that." "I know." He swallowed. "I chose not to use them." I chose not to," another elder repeated, his words small and heavy at the same time. "Why?" "Because it was wrong. Because I learned what people were when I stopped trying to make them quiet. Because she is braver than anything I have ever been, and I want to be more like that. Because I held a boy's wrist and felt him count and decided my heart could break and still be worth something." The sentences crowded behind his teeth, too many and too honest. "Because I began to care what she wanted," he said finally, and the simplicity of it was a more devastating admission than any speech. "And I'm frightened of what that says. About me." One elder folded her hands. They were beautifully made hands, the kind you want to trust with your broken. "It says you are changed." He almost laughed. The word was a child's bandage over a wound that would not close. "You know what we have to do," someone said. It might have been a mercy. It sounded like one. "We can't let two minds walk around in one body and pretend we don't see it." "I know," Tom said. He did. He also knew something else, and he had to say it in the way a person has to climb the last few steps to the roof just to breathe, even if the roof is going to be taken away. "If you take me out, leave her. Do not make her into an echo. Do not call it healing. Tell the truth and let it stand. That is not our way." "Then make it be," he said, and surprised himself with the steadiness of it. "Make this the place where we tell the truth because the lie has stopped working." They watched him. Elders are good at watching. If watching had weight, he would have felt it crush his ribs. He waited. He did not beg. He didn't, because he had learned from Daisy that sometimes you stand still and let a person come to you, because running will only make them chase. They did not take him out that day. They asked him questions, until asking any more would have been only revenge. They sent him to a room that was just big enough for pacing and just small enough to make pacing a mistake. They gave him water and a bed and the mercy of a door that did not click like a lock, even if it was one. He lay down on the bed and looked up at the ceiling and felt Daisy put her palm against his from the inside. "We're not done," she said. "I know. If they come for you, they will. Then I'll go with you as far as I can." He remembered the stories in his first life about people walking behind people they loved all the way to the river, and then stopping and saying, "I can't cross here, but I'll wait on the bank." He turned his hand so their palms matched and felt the pressure where skin met skin, and neither was alone in it. They came in the morning, when courage is stupid and honest. They woke him as if he had been sleeping. He let them take him to the bright room. He sat where they told him. He thought of a library and dust that smelled like a woman named Mrs. Fenton, and a boy's laugh, and a man's hands mending a thing that had been broken too long and therefore still wanted. The elder with the gentle voice stood near enough to touch him and did not touch him. "We have decided something," she said. "You will not like it. Do it anyway," he said, because wanting had never been the point. "We are going to move you," she said. "Not out, Over. He blinked. Over where? Into a body no one is using. He stared. A shell. If we must use your cruel word for it, she said with a faint smile. A body prepared for habitation that has endured, somehow, without habitation. There are some like that. They die and don't. They wait. We put no one in them because we have learned to be superstitious. We will put you in one because we have learned to be practical. He didn't have breath for a heartbeat. Then he realized he did, and it was because Daisy had taken a step back inside him to make space for the surprise. If you go, she said, quietly, don't forget me. I'm carrying you, he said. He didn't mean in his hands. He meant in the way a person carries a song once they have listened to it until it lives in their bones. The elders were careful. They did not want to hurt what they had decided to try. They put their hands where hands had to go. They did what had to be done. It was strange and not cruel. There was pain that wasn't punishment. There was a tearing that felt like birth, which might have been a kindness or just an accurate description. Tom let himself be moved. He let the part of him that was only himself slip free of the wrists he'd learned to love and of the eyes that looked at the world the way the person born to them had taught them to look. And he went, and he thought he would fall, and didn't. He woke in a body that had not been anyone he knew. It was larger than Daisy's and lighter, the way some woods are. Its lungs had not learned how to gasp. Its heart beat like a hand you had shaken for the first time, hesitant and hopeful. He was alone in it. The loneliness took his breath away. Then he breathed. Then he sat up. The elder was there, watchful. How do you feel? He considered. He could say, empty. He could say, like a dropped glass miraculously unbroken. He said, like I can stand up. Good. She tilted her head. And the girl? He put his hand on his new chest and found something miraculous. Nothing. No scratching, no echo, no voice, because she was not with him anymore. He looked at the elder and let the hope that was joy escape its leash. She's quiet, he said. She's herself. We left her, the elder said simply. There are not many times we have told the truth instead of our truth. We will count this one. He stood. The floor felt further away than it had yesterday. He took a step and did not fall. He felt a reaching inside himself where the place that had been Daisy would always live, and discovered it was not a wound. It was a door he could choose to open any time he liked, to let through sunlight and the smell of apples and a boy's laugh and a man's stubborn, necessary love. He opened it and heard her very faintly, not a voice, just the idea of one. Go back to them, the idea said. Bring them to me. He didn't ask permission to leave. He left. The elders let him. They watched him go as if watching a comet with theories. They would argue over for years. He went to the library. He didn't knock. He used the door that wasn't a door. He stepped into dust and hands that tightened on tools. Jared looked up at him and reached for a weapon without thinking, and then didn't reach because his mind caught up with his hands, and his mouth said a word that sounded like a question and an answer and a prayer all in one. Tom? Yes, Tom said. The word sounded different in this mouth. It would take him time to learn its music. He looked at Jared, and then at Jamie, and then at the empty door, and then at the place where someone had left a sweater folded so neatly it had to be an act of faith. She's waiting, he said. He couldn't help smiling when he said it. In her own head, in her own body. She's waiting. Jared's face did something beautiful and frightening. It threw off grief and guardedness in the same second, and replaced them with naked hope. He stepped forward and stopped and stepped forward again. He looked for the seam where a miracle would betray itself. He didn't find one. How? Jamie asked, because Jamie said the things other people's hearts couldn't say. Tom shook his head. I'll tell you later, and it won't sound real. Come on. They went. They walked in a way that told every watcher, if any were watching, that something was important and had to be done quickly, and that was a kind of permission no one in a uniform wanted to argue with. They reached the building where the elders lived. The men in grey at the door looked at Tom and then at the two with him and decided they were seeing something that didn't need to be recorded in any official way. They stood aside. The elevator was slow, as if it were reluctant to arrive at this floor on this day and this year and tell this story. It opened. They stepped in. It rose. The elder with the gentle voice met them in a hallway that had been designed to make people still. She nodded at Jared and at Jamie, as if they were not the kind of people the design intended to keep out. She led them to the room where the light had been cruel yesterday and was not today. Daisy sat on the bed. Her hair was down. Her hands were in her lap. She looked up when the door opened, and then she stood, and she did not stumble when she did. She walked toward them like a person learning how to walk again and pretending not to. Jared went to her in a rush, and then in a stop, and then in a rush again. He put his hands on her face, and then on her shoulders, and then on her waist, and then he had to sit down because the ground tilted too tenderly. Daisy laughed and cried at the same time and let him. Jamie collided with her and wrapped his arms around her middle and pressed his cheek to her chest and listened, because that was what had saved him before. She held them both and looked over their heads at Tom with eyes he had learned so well he could have drawn them with his eyes closed. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi," he said, incapable of anything braver or better. They did not make speeches. They breathed, they counted, they learned the shape of each other's present tense. After a while, when it was possible to let go without believing it meant losing, they did. Daisy sat back on the bed and brushed hair from her face and looked at Tom as if trying to see him in a new frame and not the old one. He looked back and felt the strangeness of being seen for himself. "What now?" Jamie asked, because he was practical and because the world had not slowed down just because they had found each other. "Now," the elder said from the doorway, "you leave this place and make your small, dangerous way." She smiled, and it was a weary thing. Don't make it obvious. Don't make it easy. Don't make it nothing. They left that day by a staircase that had not been used in years, the kind that smells like spiders and old decisions. Tom walked beside them and slightly behind, the way a person does when they are not part of a family but are allowed to choose to be near one. They stepped out into a city that looked the same as it had that morning, and was not because they were not. The sky had the color it always had at that hour. The pigeons made the sounds they always made. Somewhere, a siren sang its unchanging song. Jamie reached for Daisy's hand and took it without asking, because he didn't need to anymore. Jared walked with one arm around her shoulders, as if it had grown there. They went back to the library, because it had the right kind of space for new plans. The woman with the map hugged Daisy in an awkward, fierce way, and then slapped Jared on the back of the head for leaving without telling her. And then did the thing she was born to do. She spread paper and made possibilities. "We can't fight them by pretending they aren't strong," she said. "We can only fight them by being a different kind of strong." "What kind?" Jared asked, eyebrows drawn together. "The kind that tells the truth out loud until it stops being scandal and starts being an option," she said. Tom felt something ignite in his chest that wasn't shame and wasn't fear. "We go to them," he said, and the idea sounded reckless until it sounded correct. "Not like this," he added quickly, catching the way Jared's jaw set. "Not with fists, with proofs, with people like Lauren, with people who hear scratching at night and pretend they don't. We tell them we heard it too, and it didn't kill us. We tell them there is another way to be inside a life that isn't making it small. That will take 100 years, Jared muttered. "Then we start today," Daisy said, and her voice made the argument moot. They built a new kind of resistance, thin, at first like thread and then braided and then rope. It didn't look like wars. It looked like conversations in stairwells and notes left in the backs of library books under facts about the lifespan of moths. It looked like a custodian pausing with her keys and saying to the ceiling, "I wonder what would happen if I asked that question out loud, and then asking it." It looked like Lauren standing in a meeting with a face filled with calm and saying, "I think we have been too certain," and nothing exploding afterward, only quiet, and then people going home to look at the places inside themselves where echoes had been called a mercy. Tom went where he was asked. He stood with his new hands open and told his story without embroidery. People listened because his voice wasn't tremulous, and because when he said "I was wrong," it wasn't a performance. He watched the elders bend like the slow, painful bending of bold trees in a storm that has lasted longer than anyone believed possible. He watched the men in grey learn to loosen their grip before it bruised. He watched people like himself close their eyes in the night and try not to hear scratching and then listen. He watched Jared and Daisy and Jamie build a life in a way that would have been ordinary once and was an act of rebellion now. Dishes, washed and stacked, shoes lined by a door, a coat thrown over a chair not because there was nowhere else to put it, but because someone intended to wear it tomorrow. He didn't live with them. He lived 2 streets over, in a room with one window, that looked at a tree that had tried very hard to die and hadn't. He kept an apple on the sill. He learned to tie his shoes in the late afternoon light, and smiled when he had to double knot them, because some habits are beautiful. When he dreamed, he did not dream of the bright room without corners. He dreamed of a hallway that smelled like dust, and of a boy counting heartbeats, and of a man's hands fixing a hinge, because squeaking gives you away, and people deserve quiet. He dreamed of the taste of oranges, and chose apples anyway. He dreamed of walking through a city where people looked at each other as if each face were a page in a book they weren't afraid to read anymore. He saw Lauren one afternoon on the steps of a building that used to be important, and was now simply a place with stone good for sitting on. She lifted her chin. "Is it quieter?" she asked. He listened for a moment. "No," he smiled. "Better." She laughed softly. "Sometimes I think I hear singing," she said. "You probably do." They didn't name what they were doing because names make some things smaller, but if he had to, Tom would have called it learning how to be many things at once without breaking, wrong and forgiven, frightened and brave, alone and not. He would have called it beginning. On a day like any other, he stood at his window and watched the square of sun crawl across the floor the way he had that first morning. He felt the absence of the old ache and the presence of something steadier. He touched the glass and thought of writing a name there, and decided he didn't need to anymore. He turned from the window, and the room looked like a place a person could live. He smiled to himself. He went to the door. He opened it. Outside, the air tasted like rain coming. Somewhere a siren sang, and somewhere a child laughed, and somewhere a person decided to tell the truth 1 minute sooner than they might have yesterday. He walked down the stairs and onto the street and into the day that was his. He was not sure what would happen next. He was sure that he would meet it with his hands open. He passed a market and didn't flinch at the oranges. He bought apples and a coil of wire and a book with the pages falling out that someone would want to have anyway. He tied his shoelace because it had come undone on purpose. He met Jared at a corner and they nodded to each other. It was the kind of nod that belongs to people who have carried someone together and not dropped them. He ruffled Jamie's hair without asking and was forgiven for the intrusion with a grin. He found Daisy on a bench and sat beside her without talking, because some silences are the kind that sing, and you ruin them if you add words. They sat. The sun slid. The city breathed. The world did not become perfect. It became truer. It was enough.